Dear friends at the Special Interest Group in Psychology at the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry 2019, it's with great pleasure that I introduce or present you this book by Maria Nickelstein and John Morse on Deleuze and Psychology. I wish I could be there and do this in person, but unfortunately I was not able to come to Urbana this year. Hopefully I will see you there next year. So this was quite a tour de force, reading this book and trying as much as possible to understand it. I would say that is a fantastic introduction to the work of Deleuze and Guattari. Don't be deceived by its size. It is a small book, it's about 170 pages, but the font is small and it's quite dense also. But it's really, I would say that more than a philosophy book, this is, especially for people like us, is a self-help book. It was such a pleasure to read it and to read it slowly, and that perhaps took me much longer than expected, but at the same time it was very insightful. And it gave lots of opportunities to stop, to reflect, and to think about what psychology is or what psychology ought to be. It's yet reading this book and trying to understand Deleuze's thought is not always easy. One aspect that to me stands out about this book that really makes it a fantastic introduction to Deleuze is its context. It's being situated in psychology, and that's really what to me is one of the major contributions of this book, situating Deleuze's thought within the field of psychology, and especially within those aspects that we are most concerned about in psychology, especially at ICQI, such as which are the aspects of research and the clinic. What is this book about? Well, if I could summarize the book in a few words, is a book about movement. It's a book that invites us to constantly think outside the box, to think about new ways and new possibilities of doing psychology and of being a psychologist. This book invites us to consider radical moves within the field, such as the move from being to becoming, from same to difference, from diagnosis to transition. And this to me was quite enlightening, quite beautiful to see the echo of George Kelly's words, George Kelly, the founder of personal constant psychology, in some of the consideration that Maria and John make concerning how to apply Deleuze's work to the clinic, and the constant invitation to see the person in transition. So similar to Kelly's concept of transitive diagnosis, and his understanding and underscoring that diagnosis should first and foremost be something at the service of the person. So it should be a process, should be something that helps the person, the client, and the therapist move and progress, not just a static picture. Moving beyond definition into indeterminacy processes is what opens possibilities for psychology. Reading here on page 4, there is no such a thing as either man or nature now, only a process that produces the one within the other and couples the machines together. Psychology and research is concerned about processes, about people with movement, but we often forget about that in the moment in which we talk about variables, we talk about the results, we talk about static reports that are always the same, in the sense that they merely take a picture of the other or the phenomenon without considering how the phenomenon changes. And this is the ongoing invitation throughout the book. Things are in movement. Truths are located within discourses. Data are elaborations. Writing a report is not just writing a research report, is a process of inquiry. Reality for Deleuze and Guattari is delirium. Delirium in the sense of confusion, but also in the double sense here of something being a delirium, such as being a huge source of excitement, in ecstasy. The idea here is that confusion, excitement, ecstasy is an openness to possibility. Possibility that is at the core of the beautiful concept and very provocative concept of schizoanalysis. Schizo meaning divided, split, so not a move away from psychoanalysis as the analysis of the psyche to the analysis of what's cut, has been divided, what is progressively moving, changing. So the differences here that are at the core of the analysis. How is the person progressing? How is the person moving? What's different now from before? It's an invitation, in other words, to move away from identity and to think of research as something that is post-representational. I'm going to read again from the book here. Schizoanalysis attempt not to unveil the true dynamics of the unconscious searching for mummies and daddies, but to articulate the machinations and the trajectory of what Deleuze and Guattari call desiring machines in the exploration of the circumstances of contemporary life. Deleuze and Guattari's project is indeed a forceful critique of the established tenets of the West, tenets that saw embodiment in a philosophy based on representation and identity. In the process of writing a territory, when we represent something, when we talk about phenomena, problems, concerns, dynamics, politics, we are always providing a representation of this. We are providing a particular cartographic exercise, but we need to be sure that this is a work in movement, is a cartography in the sense that it's always a process of territorialization, of establishing a territory, not simply representing a territory. And this establishing territory, we engage with the whole, meaning that it's not just the observation of the other, or the territory which is at stake here, but it's also why that other, what is going on in that territory, why that particular demarcation, who is observing, what is observing, for what and for which reason are we observing this. So it's an invitation in what context? It's an invitation, in other words, to think about the context as something that moves beyond the individual, that is beyond something psychology as an internal endeavor, and instead considers the political and the social and the cultural as a whole. How do we do this? Nevertheless, we still use data, between quotes here, because it's not just data that is observed, but it's data that is situated in the world, is contextualized, is relational. The invitation of the reconsideration that Deleuze and Maria and Jones make it of empiricism are fascinating and create the grounds on which Deleuze philosophy is then based. The aim of empiricism is not simply to represent what's out there, especially something eternal or universal, transcendental, but is to find the conditions under which something new is produced. Here the parallel with the concept of problematization of Foucault is quite striking. So this means moving beyond the tyranny of what is static, of what is out there, and moving instead towards what can be, what is possible, what is becoming. The possibility of seeing something out there is just true, just happens better in the laboratory. But when we move to an ecological setting, we inevitably encounter the ever-changing human conditions and the impossibility, according to which representation becomes impossible. The impossibility of representation, not simply due to epistemological limitation, for it's not due to us not getting it or not trying harder, but instead is the limit of the human capacity to appreciate knowledge of the truth. To believe that this is the case would be to fall prey to the seduction of conscious activity, either as guilt, what I'm doing wrong or lacking that I cannot know, or a resentment. The word is a fiendish and deceptive word. There is no deficiency or evolutionary limitations either in our soul, our reason, or our brain that lies at the basis of it. The impossibility is a manifestation of something positive, something that constitutes a metaphysical condition that needs not only to be acknowledged, but also to be lived. In other words, the possibility of representation counters with the other idea that what will happen if we could represent, in other words. If it is almost like it would be the death of movement. It will be something so static that will inevitably create a dead representation, and especially in a context such as the clinic, will not help for change. The idea at the base, therefore, at the center of the project here is that of underscoring difference. Difference as the constant search for evolution, for developing a knowledge that is heretic, that is nomadic in its representation. It's nomadic in the sense that opens possibility, that opens, that wanders, but also is not isolated from the context. The nomad is somewhere and relates to other, relates to a territory, to a particular territory in which the nomad is situated, or the nomadic act is situated. And inevitably asks the person to be engaged, either as a process, both as a process of representing and being represented in the world. It's the constant search for, not so much for sameness, but it's a search for uniqueness, for what stands out as the immanent in the complexity of the life of the individual or the life of the society, as opposed to progressive accumulation of knowledge that is eternal, that is universal, and that is applicable everywhere. So if then knowledge becomes transformation, that puts us in a very particular context in the sense of doing a work here as researcher, not only of representing the other, but also transforming the other. The shift from reproduction to transformation is crucial. Such shift is needed to start with a new psychology. This is page 84. As a science, letting go the idea of knowledge as a cognitive and neutral exercise that takes place in the mind of the passive observer, an exercise of recognition of a stable natural order, and needs instead to consider the full implications implied in the awareness that in the activity of the researcher there are far more profound elements at play. The researcher is establishing a certain state of affair that has significant effects on issues and governance. This realization refers not only to a shift concerning the people out there who are researched, but also concerning the researcher, her or himself, observing the people out there, people who, as Maturana would say, could be themselves. The self of the scientist is inextricably connected to the knowledge it produces, and it needs to take responsibility for the choices being taken. So here is an invitation to counter the idea of the researcher as a doer, as somebody who simply applies a method, as I also wrote in the context of research countertransference. But instead of thinking of the researcher as a full presence that creates one of the definitional, at least in my view, aspects of qualitative research, which is the relational dimension in which knowledge is produced. Failing to do this will create strengthen or foster a sort or reproduce better an epistemology of sameness that creates that normalizes the human conditions and transforms our subjectivities, both those of the researcher and the participant or the patient, into docile bodies. When it's applied to the clinic, and the chapter on the clinic to me was perhaps the most interesting one, and especially because for its applicability here, a cartography of the clinic, seen in an assemblage, invites us to think about tracing and verifications that take place in the clinic. A verification that starts with the very name in which the clinic is situated, the work in which situates already somebody in the position of providing a service, the expert, and somebody in needs of a service. It creates, in other words, the clinic by its very name creates already an order, and that underscores a certain reality based on a view of the patient as somebody who is with deficiencies and with a pathos. As a cartographic exercise, the clinic is a relational aspect, is a relational setting. It's a relation between patients and clinicians, is a relationship between a particular kind of glaze of the clinician and a particular narrative that is expected by the patient. So that in the clinic we expect patient to talk about problems, for instance. We expect patient to talk about negativities and issues. But here the invitation that Maria and John make is fantastic here. Invites us that very provocatively tell us the clinical psychologist in the clinical setting becomes a butler, who's often the butler of psychiatry. Here I love this sentence, it's on page 145. It underscores, well, of course, a power dynamic here between medicine and psychology, but I think what stands out to me as more unique is that it's an invitation for the clinical psychologist to embrace its role as a psychologist and not to be just a lower level psychiatrist. In other words, if the clinical psychologist becomes or is simply the butler of the psychiatrist, then it loses the opportunity to provide a different voice, different understanding of what the other is, what the other is experiencing, what the pathology is going on, what kind of assemblage or representation, what are the signs of the symptoms that are manifested here. The view of the pathology, for instance, challenging the view of pathology as internal to the person, challenging formulaic considerations of the psyche and the suffering, challenging norms that define normality and pathology, and here the reference to governmentality and biopower is quite striking. Challenging norms or habits that distract clinicians on who observes and who is observed, what to observe and to give importance to. These are, and then the authors, Maria and John, say also that challenging the view of diagnosis is simply representing what's out there, and instead thinking of diagnosis as a constellation of descriptions, of signs, of symptoms that acquire a certain autonomy that has its own effects. Diagnoses have a deeply conservative role, they say. They restrain the movement of people's becoming and become totalitarian regimes of oppression. As the author writes, the challenge for the clinician then is not to read the becomings of those accesses the clinic according to pre-established regimes of sign, such as the DSM, for instance, but to engage in a paradoxical ways with such regimes of signs, so as to help those approaching the clinic to transcend those regimes and become originals. So here the role of the psychology is to reinvent the clinic, to provide other unique possibilities or reconstruction of the uniqueness of somebody's life, instead of trying to put the person within the box. So overall, this, just to conclude, this was a wonderful book. I just loved it. There were some observations about social constructionism that perhaps I didn't fully agree with, but nevertheless was inspiring, especially because, just talking briefly about this criticism of social constructionism, it seems to, they seem to ignore, but they seem to be based on the idea that is the subject the one who interprets and eventually gives meaning and lives experiences. So it seems to confuse to me social constructionism with phenomenology or interpretativism. But and I see in social constructionism this risk, but there's also social constructionism is much more than this, because especially in the later writings of Kenneth Gergen, but also in the work of people such as White and Epstein, or Herlin Anderson or John Schotter, there is a certain underscoring of the constant possibility of redefining reality, of that we're always working with constructions in a network of meanings and significations that does not belong to the subject. So here the echo in social constructionism, which links also to Deleuze thought, is with Bateson and Clifford Geertz. So this idea that we always live in webs of significances, and any interpretation is always contextual and grounded. And research, or the mere act of observing, is performative, and is also a performance, of course, that creates a particular reality and particular ontologies. So for instance, talking about this, on page 68, when they talk about social constructions, after talking about social constructionism, the author says, instead of starting with a subject that uses method to access certainty of the world, a world that is out there, transcendental world, the question is how subject is constituted inside the given. And I think this is a Deleuze question, but I think it's very much could very easily be a social constructionist question as well. Overall, this book is about freedom. Is about freedom from fascism. Is moving away from all form of fascism. And here I would like to conclude with the words of Foucault in his preface to the Anti-Oedipus, where Foucault underscores that the work of Deleuze and Guattari is a work that concerns the the art of living. That if we could summarize some principles, Foucault says, the principles of living, or this art of living, is living free political actions, is to free political action from all unitarian and totalitarian paranoia, is to withdraw allegiances from all categories of the negative. And here we see a lot of what Maria and John write in terms of the clinic. All categories of the negative, such as the law, the limit, the castration, pathology, which Western thought has long held sacred as a form of power, as an access to reality. Prefer what is positive and multiple, difference over uniformity, flows over unity, mobile arrangements over systems. Believe that what is productive is not sedentary but nomadic. What is needed is to de-individualize the individual by thinking about its displacement, and not only its placement, its multiplication rather than its identities, its possibility rather than its representation. This book is an openness to freedom, and I would like to thank the author for this opportunity to reading and better understanding Deleuze's work and to contextualize it within the field of psychology. So I would like to end here. Thanks a lot for your attention. It's been a great pleasure, and I hope you have a lot of fun at ICQI. Goodbye, and I will see you soon.